Prior to Counter-Strike 2, surfing was one of the largest community game modes in the series. It was fun, competitive, and completely unique to the game's identity for like 20 years. But the release of a new game almost killed it, and many are worried it might not recover. In every Counter-Strike game, you are able to glide across angled platforms, often resembling pyramids, by strafing against them and smoothly moving your mouse to gain momentum and speed. This is called surfing, and practically everyone who's played CS even once has at least heard of it. It was discovered way back in 2004 by accident by a player known as Marion, and exploded into a massive community game mode that's been in every Counter-Strike the franchise has put out. The maps are basically obstacle courses, sometimes in tiers or long continuous tracks, but they can even have singular goals like landing on a specific platform, or even involve combat. Fun fact for anyone that cares, one of my first Counter-Strike experiences was on a map called Surf Egypt. Very legendary back in 1.6. Point is, surfing was huge. The maps were fun, challenging, and whatever you could possibly imagine, someone probably created. But now, things just aren't the same. The community seems to be a fraction of what it used to be, and the art of surfing itself feels like, well, it's died. I wanted to know why this was the case, so I reached out to Repster, a content creator for Counter-Strike's auxiliary game modes. And he broke down the issue into three main problems. The first being the ramp bug.
The first is we have this glitch called a ramp bug. For some reason, the map creates these tiny little triangles, about 0.06 units, or that's what we think it is, on the map on these ramps, and no matter what you do, you will always run into them. And we are waiting on Valve to fix this, and it hasn't been fixed for any of the three major Source games where people surf.
Now, to be fair, the ramp bug has existed in pretty much every Counter-Strike. As a community game mode, this was always going to be a part of the process, but for some reason, players are finding that it's happening a lot more frequently in CS2. On top of that, there are people who just generally believe that surfing in CS2 doesn't feel as good. And for sure, when the game first launched, it felt like shit. That being said, as Valve continued to update movement, animations, and subtick after release, things have gotten better. Sometimes worse, but eventually better. And to be fair, I remember people complaining about this exact same thing when Go first came out. And there are still people who only surf on Source to this day because it's considered the smoothest experience. Yes, some people take this shit that seriously.
I think if you ask the average, diehard surfer, they would say, I will never touch CS2. I know it's going to be broken forever. Obviously, the casual player will not know the difference or care. I think the other thing that's impacting things is loss of FPS because the engine is older. That's a big, if you're running on a computer from 2015, don't launch CS2. Go play an older game, you know?
Now, a lot of these issues regarding ramp bugs and some of the feeling-related concerns could potentially be fixed by the community. But that is where we get to the second problem Repster explained: a lack of resources.
The second problem is Valve has not released a lot of the documentation needed for scripting and plugin development. It's very hard to actually get into the game through code to change it and create these features and plugins for players, and some of them just haven't been developed.
Now, for pretty much the franchise's entire existence, the community has been on their own when it comes to most things, especially plugins and scripting. But now that we have an entirely new game and an entirely new engine with whole new mechanics, it's become an even bigger challenge for servers and map makers to solve these problems, or even get things working in the first place. This could also be the reason we're currently seeing such a lack of actual surf maps, or even servers for that matter. But a bigger culprit could also be Repster's third problem: the server browser. It is awful.
The third problem that affects every single game mode is the community browser being broken. Right now, if you click on that little icon, the globe in CS2, you get dog shit. You get a series of servers that don't exist, or they all link back to the same one. And this problem not only affects Counter-Strike 2, it affects TF2, Counter-Strike Source, and any game with a browser. It's just in CS2, it is the worst it's ever been.
For those of you who haven't had the misfortune of clicking on it yet, Counter-Strike 2's server browser minimizes the game and opens its own window. Why? I have no clue. At first glance, this doesn't seem like the biggest deal, especially considering that Counter-Strike's server browser was never really that good in the first place. But this just feels super unnecessary, and it's even worse than it's ever been. On top of being slow, if not completely unresponsive at times, Repster explained that a lot of the servers shown are actually fake, and Valve does nothing to get rid of them. You might see a cool map on a server you want to try with a solid amount of players, but once you pick it, it just redirects you to a different server on a different map, often empty. It's gotten to the point where players have to use a separate website that acts as an actual working browser for the game. It's super easy to use and works very well, but how many times have we talked about Valve adding these unnecessary hurdles to their games? It's just like the issue with Face It. In 2024, why do players need to use a separate service just to play the game properly? And how is that going to entice new players to try out and look for these game modes that they might not even know exist?
And these are barriers to entry that no developer would allow. Like, why would you make it so hard to get into a game? I remember Rocket League, you just spam A bunch of times and you automatically get into a game. And that fluidity of experience for users is very important and totally killed for our aspect of the game. Whereas with matchmaking, you invite a bunch of players, you click play and you're in with like nice sound effects and visual effects. It's really important for a user to have.
Now, I should point out that most of these issues apply to pretty much all community game modes, and not just surfing. Some modes, like Zombie Escape, are doing pretty well, all things considered, but KZ, Bunny Hop, RP, and others are suffering right alongside Surf. But despite that, and despite all these issues I've mentioned, and even the smaller ones I don't have time to talk about, Repster chalks the main issue with community servers struggling to a lack of exposure. And I think I agree with him. Yes, Valve needs to fix the server browser desperately, and they should do their best whenever they can to help out creators. But honestly, this game has always been DIY. The community likely just needs more time with this new game and new engine. Eventually, it will lead to more maps, better plugins and scripting, and maybe even some new game modes we've never seen before. But all of that is for nothing if players don't know they exist. These servers and creators don't have the money and reach to promote themselves, so it's always been a if you know type situation. Listen, despite the concern online, I don't see community servers dying, and neither does Repster. But by the way things are right now, I don't see them growing either. With a new game and all these new players who might not know about these kinds of things existing, how are they going to find out about them if there's so many barriers in front of them?
If I was going to say the other big hurdle, it would just be exposure and awareness of these features. Like if Valve were to say, here's the custom map of the week, that would be fantastic. Or anything just to say, hey, look at this part of the game mode. Exposure and brand awareness is like probably the second biggest hurdle.
Valve needs to start promoting the amazing things the community does, because it wouldn't be where they are without them. But until they do, allow me to. There are other ways to play Counter-Strike than just competitive or deathmatch. Game modes and maps unlike anything that exists in the game proper, and I implore you to search for them and try them. It might just open you up to an entirely new world this game has to offer. A world with less cheaters too. Yeah, I didn't play competitively until like 2015, maybe even 2016. I followed like esports and stuff like that for like years because my brother played competitively in 1.6, but yeah, I was just playing surf, obstacle course, mini games, zombie outbreak or zombie escape was great, jailbreak. I was a big role player.